Welcome to Talkin' About It, where we're doing a deep dive into the Lord of the Rings books from two very different perspectives. I'm Evelyn, and I've never read the books.
I'm Robert, and I've read the books too many times to count. Come join us on this adventure. Before we begin, we want to give a big shout out to everyone who's been listening to the podcast while we get into our groove. The more we do this, the better we'll get.
And I'm very new to audio editing and mixing, so thanks for being patient, especially that first episode, which was a little rough.
Also, an exciting announcement. We are now on Patreon.
You can see all our notes if you can read our handwriting, get bonus content, and Discord to chat even more about the Lord of the Rings.
Speaking of bonus content, we have a bonus episode coming up soon, so be on the lookout for that.
All right, I think that's everything. Let's get into the episode. So we are back talking about Chapter 2, Shadow of the Past. Now, was it just me or was this a really long chapter?
It was not a long chapter compared to the ones that are coming up.
Oh no.
Yeah. Well, also, we had a really short introduction chapter.
That was short? That felt like a normal chapter length to me.
Yeah, well, there you go.
All right. Well, I mean, that kind of, I feel like that's one of the reasons that it took me so long to get to this, because I didn't really remember this too much because this is technically one of the chapters I have supposedly read. However, it was just long and there were some slightly dry parts, and it took me about an hour to read this one chapter, just very meticulously taking notice of everything, trying to take notes. So, how did you feel trying to go through this chapter?
Well, it was old stuff for me. There are some things I noticed. Maybe not necessarily the first time, but I noticed for us to at least mention.
Okay, so I guess we should just go ahead and dive right into it. I love how it automatically starts talking about the second disappearance of Mr. Bilbo Baggins and how it was talked about for a year and a day.
Yes, yeah, I like that too. It begins with the idea that Bilbo is still the topic of what's going on around town.
Yeah, like they say he's a fireside story and a legend. Like they tell it to young hobbits, even though everyone knows the story already. They're still there.
I think they're also alluding to many, many years down the road because he shows up with a flash and a bang and has presents.
Right. Well, yeah. I want to.
He's a hobbit Santa Claus.
That could be very true. I love how they call him the Mad Baggins, and that they just kind of put a lot of the blame on Gandalf, being like, can't, like, he's this guy who made Bilbo into this crazy hobbit, and they want him to leave Frodo alone. And they talk about how Frodo very scandalously threw a party for Bilbo's 112th birthday party, the anniversary of when he played his little trick. And how some people thought that that was a lot of fun, but most people were just scandalized.
Right. And well, it wasn't just that one either. He kept having the birthday parties even after the 11th and 12th, the 112th.
Right. I did the math on this. They're talking about how how Frodo is now 50 and how it was 17 years since the disappearance of Bilbo, and he still throws a birthday party every year. And I didn't realize that this really is going along, or going so long, where it's been 17 years since Frodo saw Bilbo. And I like that they mentioned how he's 50 and how that's the same age that Bilbo was when he had his adventure, and Frodo is now having a lust for adventure himself.
Right. And also when we're talking about age, so just some quick notes about that. So, Frodo, just like Bilbo, has younger friends.
Yes.
Okay. And but they're all related.
Right, I noticed that.
Because all of them are related to the Otuk,
Yeah, they talk about Merry
the
and Pippin
Otuk.
and how they're all related to the Old Took as well, which leads me to, I mean, rightfully assume since I know the movie that Merry and Pippin go on the adventure with him, that they also have this slightly more adventurous side than the average Hobbit.
Right, and if you remember from The Hobbit, you know, the adventuring side seems to be taken from the Tooks.
Right.
Right?
Which again, I can't wait to read more about the Tooks later on.
Yeah. So yeah, so just some statistics thrown out there real fast.
Okay.
Okay, so Frodo is 12 years older than Samwise. He is 22 years older than Pippin, and he's 14 years older than Merry.
I didn't realize he was the older friend.
Yes.
That's interesting. That's just, I really relate to that because I'm usually the older friend in my friend group. I tend to be a little bit older than most of my peers.
Right, and like I said, all of them are related to the Otuk.
Right.
For Frodo, it's his grandfather. For the other three, it's their great grandfather.
So they're talking about how Frodo, I love it when he says that he wishes he had gone on the adventure with Bilbo every year that passes. More and more he's walking the woods, going along these same paths and just wanting more.
Right, and also there's all these reports of strange things being seen around since Bilbo left. Elves are seen as well as dwarves on the road in bigger numbers.
Yes, they're just that I love how it burns down to elves are just piecing out. They're like, "No, we're done with this. We're done with the dealings of Middle Earth. We're leaving. Bye."
Right, and also Frodo was starting to meet with dwarfs,
Right.
coming and going from the house. There's also a section in here where it's talking about strange things going on. Sam talks about these tree men, these giants, as you might call them. They do say that one is bigger than a tree was seen far away up in the North Moors.
Right. Yeah, like Sam is talking with oh, what was his name? I wrote it down. I thought
Ted.
Ted, yes, there it is. Ted Sandyman. So he's talking with Ted Sandyman at the Green Dragon Inn, and they're discussing all the strange happenings around, and they're talking about how even though most hobbits don't believe it, even the most isolated hobbit that has no care for the outside world has at least heard these rumors. And something I wanted to mention before we get too far off is what they were talking about is how the Dark Tower has been rebuilt, and I'm guessing that's significant. How orcs are multiplying for the first time in like centuries. Trolls are now smart. It's like evil is evolving, and then there's mentions of these new evils. And so the elves and these dwarves are coming across the borders, and it's the first mention of a border patrol almost for
Right.
the Shire,
Yeah.
where even though tons of people are coming in, like moving through the Shire trying to get away, even more are left behind. And this really reminded me what you talked about how this was written during World War II, and this really reminds me of refugees and how it really reads as like these refugees trying to just flee this evil that
Right. Yeah.
as of right now is not affecting the Shire. And I definitely can see a lot of parallels that Tolkien drew between refugees coming in from Britain from Hitler and now the dwarves and the elves seeking refugee from Sauron.
Yeah. But not only are the elves leaving their lands, they're leaving.
Right, they're
Period.
going to the shore. And that's something that I don't know if we've mentioned, but that is, it's mentioned in The Hobbit, it's mentioned here, that it's kind of their afterlife. They set sail over the sea, never to return.
Right. So how Sam puts it is they are sailing over the sea. They are going into the west and leaving us. And the book even says he kind of chants that. So they are admitting that something is going on and the elves are leaving the land, but they really don't want to say that in those words. Not out loud, anyway.
Right. And during the entire talk that he's having, there's an audience, and the audience kind of chuckles every time Ted gets a point in, and they're like, it's almost like they're on his side with it and thinking he's winning this argument, but it's not really an argument. It's just stating facts and people unwilling to relate facts, and that's something that I feel like really relates to current political climate, which I was not expecting to draw those parallels right now. So then Gandalf returns.
Then Gandalf returns. He's been gone for a long while.
But he does say that every few years he does come in and check up on Frodo. And just like Bilbo, Frodo is not really aging. He's not showing his age like Bilbo did. And they're really hinting that that's the influence of the ring. Right. And just a random thing that has no significance at all, or at least I don't think has significance, is they talk about Gandalf and the pipeweed.
Yes.
And how he's very proud of being able to do just it very nicely. And just because we've talked about pipeweed before and how it's just, to me, hilarious how it's a rather insignificant thing that's such a cultural importance to hobbits that they throw that in there and it's awesome.
Yeah. So this time when Gandalf comes for a visit, he's been gone away for 9 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like 3 times as long as
he normally
is.
Right. And he's really concerned about the ring at this point.
Well, but in the beginning, when they first meet, Gandalf mentions to Frodo, "You look the same as ever." And Frodo replies, "So do you." But he does not speak it, but he thinks Gandalf actually looks older and more careworn than he's ever seen him before.
True. Yeah. And that really is a physical hint as to just how upset Gandalf kind of is. And this really goes into talking about the ring. So I guess it's probably easier to just kind of go in order about what they say. So he's talking about how he suspects this ring is even more powerful than originally thought. How there were all these magical rings made and even these great rings, but he has suspicion that this might be the one ring, this all-powerful ring. And he explains that these great rings and this one ring, how the owners, they never die, but they still continue to fade. And that made me immediately think of Gollum, how we know he got the ring practically centuries ago. It sounds like centuries the way that they talk about it.
Not centuries. So he mentioned Gandalf. Well, it mentions that Gandalf thinks about Bilbo leaving for his adventure 80 years ago.
Right.
That's not centuries.
Well, no, Gollum, though, has had it for centuries.
Oh, yeah, Gollum's had it for centuries. Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, how Gollum has had the ring for centuries, and he's faded into this unrecognizable, pathetic monster. That's just so insane in the membrane.
Right. I mean, it's long ago enough for Gandalf to say that these were the ancestors to hobbits.
Right. So that was a correction. I was always under the impression that he was a hobbit, but they're saying these are hobbit-like.
The movie does that.
Oh, that might explain it.
The movie does say more about them being hobbit than hobbitish.
Gotcha. So yeah, so they're talking about him being hobbit-ish, and how, and I love the line where they're talking about how just as the ring turns the owner invisible, the owner's life force also starts to fade as well.
As well, right.
And Frodo's terrified at this point. And this is just the start.
Right.
Like Frodo, like they specifically say, Frodo was terrified.
Right. So, Gandalf says, it is far more powerful than I ever dared to think of at first.
Right.
So powerful that in the end it would utterly overcome anyone of mortal race who possessed it.
Right.
It would possess them.
Yes. And that's what they talk about, how Bilbo had mentioned he was thin and stretched. And he always thought it was just his own self doing that, but it was the ring taking control. And I'm only going to mention this once on this episode because I know I can go really into it because I'm looking at Horcrux parallels from Harry Potter. It really sounds like a Horcrux parallel to me, where this ring is affecting the mood and everything because of the life force inside it. And that's something that they do talk about is that the ring itself is sentient, but we'll get to that in a minute because there's a few more things
So,
before
in other
that.
words, Harry Potter stole the idea.
Not stole the idea, but very similar ideas because they're both obviously that hero's journey that we've mentioned. But I really like how they talk about the similarities between Bilbo and Gollum with the ring, how they interact with the ring, and this line where lies were too much alike for my comfort about how they said they got the ring, where Bilbo said, "Oh, he won it. He definitely won it. There's no doubt he won it." And uh, Gollum was, "It's my birthday present. It's my birthday present." And again, just a Harry Potter thing for a second. I love how Gandalf is so completely open with everything that's happening. And I wish Dumbledore had, and that's the biggest criticism that I always have at Harry Potter is I wish that Dumbledore had been more open with Harry because maybe things wouldn't have been so crazy. So I'm seeing that as well. That's just where my mind goes. You know I'm obsessed with Harry Potter. Sorry. Not sorry. Um
Right. But also, Frodo's afraid that Bilbo knew about some of this.
Right, he does ask, and Gandalf is like, it's okay. Bilbo truly did tell you everything he knew about it. This is me now learning it. And Frodo later even says, like, why didn't she tell me? And Gandalf's like, because I'm only learning this right now.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you right now. And I like that. I like that because I feel like in a lot of fantasy novels, at least modern fantasy novels, there's always this mystery left to the last minute about what is this mysterious object and this hero trying to figure that out versus this is exactly what it is. This is what we need to do. And so that makes me slightly concerned that obviously something's going to go wrong.
Right. So it seems like Gandalf thought it might have been one of the rings, but not the ring.
Right.
And actually, one reason why he decides that it is the ring, is because he has been able to account for the rest.
Right. Yeah, he talks about Saruman the White and how his pride has grown and Gandalf is suspicious and how he was saying, "No, it's fine. It can't be." And Gandalf being suspicious did go and account for all those other rings. And so he really is impressed almost with the fact that Bilbo and the hobbits around them have just not completely succumbed so quickly to this ring. And how he talks about how he's probably the only one of the wise who knows anything about hobbits at all. And he talks about how hobbits are, because they're so unassuming, they're very unassuming to the outside evil. And that he mentions how amazing and important it was that Bilbo gave up the ring of his own accord.
Right. So, you talked about Gandalf being only one of the wise.
Right.
So, the wise council, they're basically wizards.
They're all wizards, I thought.
Yeah, they're all, yeah. I mean, they don't call themselves wizards. They really don't call themselves wizards, but the people around them don't know what else to call them, so they call them wizards.
All right.
Whereas they call themselves the wise.
Okay. All right. But yeah, he really talks about how because he's really the only one that knows about hobbits, it was really interesting because he says that they've been entirely overlooked. It even says Hitherto entirely overlooked the existence of hobbits. What is Hitherto? I underlined that because I wasn't sure about that word. Am I even saying that right? Hitherto?
Show me the book.
So, looking at the book, apparently it's hitherto, and I
Correct.
can't read.
That's why you said it the way you sound. Like, what are you talking about? Like,
So, I would like to say for the podcast, I am dyslexic. So, this to me was a new word. And so that's why I actually, like, I had to make sure I wrote it down in my notes to make sure I wasn't reading it wrong, because I definitely read it wrong the first time I saw the word. And then once I corrected myself, I'm like, oh, I'm even more confused at this point. I thought it was a character. But anyway, because the entire existence of hobbits so far has been ignored, this great evil is pissed and is now wanting revenge. Like, it mentions how it's going to want revenge. In the book, it even says there is such a thing as malice and revenge.
but before that, it says, I believe that hitherto.
But it says, and hobbits as miserable slaves would please him far more than hobbits happy and free. How he's talking about, even though having hobbits turn evil wouldn't be a make or break scenario for the fight between good and evil, it's still a revenge type thing.
So Gandalf is not talking about now. Gandalf is talking about in the future. When he finds out, not if, when he finds out there's a such people as hobbits and that there's a shire, he wants to then enslave them.
Oh, see, I was thinking that they were saying that he has now found out and will now seek revenge.
So a little later on in the chapter, we'll find out that Gollum
Right.
has probably told him about hobbits and the Shire, but he still does not know what that is and where it is.
Okay.
But
All
he's,
right.
but he is actively looking for it now.
Gotcha. So, going back on track, Gandalf is very suspicious. This is the One Ring. So he just yeets it into the fire. He just straight up yeets the ring into the fire.
What?
Yeet. Yeet. It is. Anyway. Okay, boomer. Um he basically chucks it into the fire, and part of it is, it read to me at least, like he didn't want to touch it for longer than he absolutely had to.
Right.
That is part of what I got out of that. He's like, I'm not even going to hold it. I'm just gonna take it and just throw it. And the ring actually doesn't do anything at first, which, again, from watching the movie, I was under the impression it was like almost immediately, but it takes a hot minute for it to actually get hot and start revealing. And it shows the Elvish script and the translation, which is one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them.
Right, and because it's only 2 lines from that Elven Lord, it gives us a hint of things to come.
True.
As a reader, but also want to point out that during this whole conversation, Samwise is you can hear his shears working.
Right. I mentioned that later, how he's talking about how you can hear Sam in the background with the shears, and how they mention later on how it has gone totally silent. And so you know he's listening in.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, so it's now absolutely confirmed that it's the One Ring. Frodo is extremely fearful and says, "How on earth did it come to me?" And I like that. I really like that line, because that I don't know how to explain it. I just really like that line.
Right. And also, it's interesting because the book then gives us the entire elven lore. The
Yes.
entire elven lore.
And that actually brings me to a question. Because something that Gandalf says earlier is that these rings were forged by elves. And then it's mentioned that Sauron himself is the one that forged the One Ring. So was Sauron an elf at one point? That's my question. Because I don't know if I've ever seen Sauron. Even I don't recall seeing him in the movie, just hearing about him. Just the eye, the giant eye thing is always what I associated with Sauron.
Well, in the movie, we see the Dark Lord fighting, and we see somebody taking his finger off with a sword, and the finger with the ring falls away. So, one reason why and this is going back to your Horcrux.
Right, yeah, they talk about the history and about how Gilgalad and Isildar. I'm not pronouncing these right. I know that for a fact. But anyway, how they were that was how they were able to get the ring away from him in general was they just straight off cut off the finger, which I think is a really interesting parallel because the one thing I remember from the movies is that Frodo gets his finger bitten off and the finger and the ring go
Right,
falling
right.
to their doom.
Okay, so Gandalf only tells Frodo at this time those first two lines.
Right.
But the book wants us to know more than Frodo at this point.
Okay.
Okay? And so then what we have is the explanation of the whole thing. 3 rings for the elven kings under the sky, 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone, 9 for mortal men doomed to die, 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all, 1 ring to find them, 1 ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them in the land of Mordor where the shadows lie. So this is also the first time in the book that we hear mention of Mordor as well.
No, it's not. Mordor was mentioned slightly beforehand. How the flames of Mordor were back. But this is like again like really talking about what Mordor actually is. Like giving us more of a background to it. But that's again brings me to that question, was Sauron originally an elf that turned evil? That's my question. Are we going to find that out or can you just tell me?
He's no, Sauron is a divine being. Uh, Gandalf mentions that he was uh, part of the race of the Valar,
Okay.
which we learn about
Are we in supplementary material?
yeah, supplementary
Okay.
material.
So we'll eventually get to that.
Right, and that they were considered a far higher order. So he is some of the first beings.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So anyway, that thank you. That answered my question really well. So anyway, it goes on to telling how this great evil, how on earth were they able to stop it? And I like how it said it was easier to resist united. And again, I feel like that really comes to that parallel with Tolkien talking about the war, where you really had to unite as allies to take everything on. And how they overthrew Sauron, literally taking the ring from its hand. But then they talk about how the ring was lost. And it was lost in the Great River Anduin. Is that right?
Sounds good.
Okay. Anyway, so they talk about how the ring was lost and eventually it was found by not hobbits, but hobbit like. So, kind of the ancestors to hobbits by Smeagol and his friend Deagle.
Well, Deagle is the one that actually found it.
True, yes, you're right. Sorry. Deagle is the one that actually finds the ring.
And it's interesting, though, how quickly this ring at that time turned Smeagol.
Yes, Smeagol
Or
immediately just beat the crap out of him.
or was the ring seeking Schmeagol because Schmeagol already had these evil tendencies?
Hmm, true. Or was the ring just trying to be found in general and didn't really care and then could do something else? Because
Right,
it seems like the ring was really trying hard to escape from Smeagol for a while.
right. And also, uh, Bilbo lets Frodo know to be careful because the ring can become large and fall off your finger without you knowing about it. And that's why both Bilbo and Frodo keeps the ring on a silver chain.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I guess because the ring's like, well, these peace loving guys ain't gonna kill anyone. Need to find the next guy.
Yep.
But yes, it talks about just how quickly Smeagol becomes very corrupted. He calls it his birthday present, um, and he basically becomes banished by his entire village, his friends and family, because he just immediately becomes this corrupted thing. So yeah, I guess that does like beg the question, did the ring find him because he already had these tendencies or did the ring cause it?
Right. So there's some speculation about the fact that, you know, he ends up becoming not fearful. He ends up not liking the light at all. Not just sunlight. He doesn't like moonlight
Right,
either,
yeah.
which drives him
Underground.
underground. And it's hinted at that maybe this is part of the ring's quote unquote plan to get down there so an orc would find it, and if an orc found it, or a
Ah,
goblin, if an orc or a goblin found it, they would bring it to him.
gotcha. Okay.
Or if they found it, it would easily be found.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
So, um, and so we can also say that the reason Bilbo ends up finding the ring is because the ring, I'm going to say decided as if it's a,
No, the way it describes it is it's almost sentient. It
yeah,
says the ring betrayed many masters. So it really does have this thing that this ring itself is semi sentient.
right. And so the ring wants itself to be found by Bilbo, so it gets brought out of the caves
Right.
and is able to start making its way back
Yeah.
to its owner, to its master.
One thing to mention before we go on is they talk about how Smeagol became Gollum. And I know that there's a lot of speculation that Gollum has some other meaning, but it just says straight up in the text that it's that like gulp that he does, just gulp, gulp, gulp. Like that's that gulp he does. And I like that even though he's become like completely corrupted, Gandalf says, "Yet not no hope." And I really like that. Like Gandalf, even in this completely terrifying moment, is like, well, there's not no hope.
There's not no hope, right?
There's not no hope.
Right.
And I find that very interesting. And
Yeah,
how,
especially by saying it that way. Instead of saying
yeah,
there's a little hope, he says there's not no hope.
right. And how he says, even though he doesn't think that Gollum will ever be redeemed, he feels it in his bones that he still has a larger part to play, which obviously means we're going to see that happen.
Right. Yeah. And then, and before we get off too far away from all the rings together, so we have to remember also Tolkien was, being a linguist,
Mm-hmm.
being an expert in Middle English, and that old of English,
Uh huh.
uh, that
Hitherto.
hitherto.
Anyway, sorry.
So Tolkien knows that from the Anglo-Saxon history that kings and or whatever gave their trusted people rings as a one as a gift and two to identify them as being a loyal servant to the king.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, so that's where we start to get the whole thing with the signet rings. I mean,
Right, yeah.
this eventually turns to signet rings, where the ring identifies the person by putting a coat of arms on it,
Okay, yeah, yeah, I know about that.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Okay. Um but anyway, just keeping on with Gollum, they say that Gollum is now in Mirkwood. How even though he's terrified of the outside and just light and even moonlight, his obsession with this ring is more than the fear that he has. And so he has ended up in Mirkwood. And Gandalf even mentions um that he had Aragorn help him track him down. So it's our first mention of Aragorn.
Uh-huh.
And how again they kept him alive because they feel in his bones that something else. And he says that he has suspicion that Gollum could have easily made it all the way here to the Shire to Bilbo's house to track him down because of how determined he was. But instead, just like we mentioned earlier, it seems that he went to, or at least got intercepted by the forces of darkness, and he just ratted them out.
Right. Yeah.
He just straight up ratted them out. And then this is the first time that we hear mention of Sam Shears not working. So at this point, we know Sam is fully engulfed in this story.
Right, yeah.
He's like, okay, what's happening next? And at this point in the chapter, I'm at that point too. I'm like, okay, I need to know more. Obviously, with all my questions. And so we know that Gollum snitched and that the name of Baggins is now important.
Right. Right. And Frodo even says, I wish it need not happen in my time. And Gandalf says, that's what everybody wishes.
Right, yeah.
That stuff like this doesn't happen in their own time. But there's nothing that we can do about it happening in our time. All we have to decide is what we're going to do with the time that is given.
I loved that line. I highlighted that line. I really like that line a lot. I feel like that really explains everything that Tolkien is trying to get through with this first couple chapters. Is, okay, things don't look good. Things look really, really bad, in fact. However, we can do this. But, yeah, I like how Frodo's immediately like, well, can't I just get rid of it? And Gandalf's like, do it, I dare ya.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, try, right, go ahead.
And get rid of it how? You just threw it in fire. If it was regular gold, it would have melted.
Right.
Yep.
So that's when they talk about how it has to be destroyed in Odoruin, is what they call it.
Right, in the fires that
forged
it. And Gandalf also, talks about, the enemy still lacks this one thing to give him strength and knowledge to beat down the resistance.
Right.
And that's the One Ring.
And Frodo also says, well, can I just give it to you? And Gandalf's like, no. Just no. Right. He knows he will be tempted. Like, he's so impressed that hobbits are able to resist it as much as they have. And so he knows that he will immediately be possessed and corrupted by this ring. So he doesn't want to do it. And they even talk about how the other rings corrupted men, how they'd mentioned the ring wraiths.
Right. Which is interesting because...
Which I just remember looking like Dementors in the movie.
Right. But this is also interesting because, so here is a word that Tolkien has invented, ring wraiths.
Okay.
Because in the mythology that he studied, wraiths are really, they're even lesser than ghosts.
Right, yeah.
But here, they're a being.
These corrupted beings.
Yeah, these corrupted,
in between man and ghost, almost.
Right. He tells Frodo that the three rings, the fairest of all, the elf lords hid from him, and his hand never originally touched them. So he cannot find them, and they are not
corrupted.
And they're not corrupted, and they're not evil. Now, the seven that the dwarf kings possessed, three he's recovered. How Gandalf knows this, we don't know. He just tells us straight up.
Right. Okay.
3 has been recovered. And the others, dragons have consumed,
Awesome.
meaning he ate these dwarfs. Um, and then 9 he gave to mortal men who are proud of themselves and proud of what they can do. And that is how he was able to corrupt them because.
Well, like pride's one of the 7 deadly sins,
Right,
and if you look at Greek mythology, pride is the worst. Like pride is the worst fault you can have.
right. And so Gandalf has explained to us that the way that Sauron can overcome uh, the forces against him is to find this one ring.
Right. So Frodo decides, all right, let's go. Let's do this thing. Let's just get rid of it. Let's go right now. And while they're deciding it, Sam kind of bursts in.
Well, he
And,
didn't kind of burst in.
well, Gandalf's like, yo, you're listening in.
Well, he doesn't even say, yo, you're listening in. He reaches down and snatches him out of the garden and pulls him through the window.
Right.
You know?
And Sam's like, can I go? He insists. He's like, I want to go so bad. I can be helpful. I want to join. And when Gandalf says, fine, you can come, he's so happy he bursts in tears.
Right.
And honestly, mood. I really sympathize with that.
Right. Well, and this is also where we start getting hints of Samwise's character.
Okay.
Okay. So, so Samwise is more of a quote unquote genuine hobbit than Frodo is, even.
True.
Because Frodo has become high minded. He's visiting with these foreigners, if you want to call them, like
right.
dwarfs and elves.
And while Sam's accepting of them, he's still kind of a little bit more on the, I'm just going to do some landscaping and eat some food and just have a nice, relaxing time.
Frodo has decided that he's responsible for keeping Bilbo's essence alive. That he's where Samwise is the genuine hobbit.
Mm-hmm.
Frodo is much less so. He has decided that he has to carry on the things that Bilbo was doing. He has these strange visitors all the time, including Gandalf, who comes every few years for a visit.
Right, which everyone else is just like, no, he's a troublemaker.
Right, he's a troublemaker because he's the one that, talked Frodo into running off.
And talked Bilbo before that.
Right. Yeah, and also what's interesting is that we get the comparison between Frodo and Bilbo as well. A little hint of it, that he is his true heir, not just.
Right. He has this adventure lust that we talked about at the beginning of this episode. He's the same age that Bilbo was when he went on his adventure. He's very much a intellectual and wanting to know more about the outside world rather than being just concerned with the Shire.
Gandalf also tells him and us that one reason why Sauron was not looking for the ring is because he believed that the elves had destroyed it.
Oh,
He wasn't looking for it at all until he found out,
I guess from Gollum.
Through Gollum, that the ring was still around.
Gotcha.
And that the Bagginses had it. Those nasty Bagginses.
So he's obviously pissed. And so from the movie, I do know that the ring wraiths come for Frodo. But I don't know when. But yeah, they're about to start on their journey. And that's the chapter. So, do you have anything else to add? So that was the chapter. Anything that we missed real fast?
Well, one of the things I also find interesting is that Frodo has a little bit of that, I don't want to call it whininess, but it's a
I guess.
challenge to his comfort, basically, more so than anything else. Like he says, he asks Gandalf, why did you let me keep it? Why didn't you make me throw it away or destroy it?
See, it read more as he was fearful and terrified, where he wants adventure, but this is too much.
Well, but
That would be out of my comfort zone.
right, but Gandalf, says, "Let you, make you. Haven't you been listening to anything I've said? You are not thinking of what you are saying. But as for throwing it away, that was obviously wrong."
Yeah, Gandalf does immediately just like call him out on that. I guess it comes off slightly whiny, but as a very whiny person myself, I get it.
Right, and then at this time, so when Gandalf tells him, as you mentioned earlier, try it, throw it away.
Yeah.
And so Frodo takes the ring out of his pocket and looks at it, and it now appears to be smooth, without a mark on it.
Right.
So the writing has already disappeared. And the gold looked very fair and pure, and Frodo thought how rich and beautiful it was, how perfect it was, how much of an admirable and precious thing it was.
Yeah.
Uh,
So the ring pulled out the equivalent of baby googly eyes and an Instagram filter.
all right, Millennial.
it it filtered itself. It made it look very precious. Was that about everything?
Yeah, that's everything. I think we need to include in this
Okay.
episode.
So, I
What
guess final thoughts on the chapter itself.
final thoughts on the chapter? We got a lot of good information.
Yes, even though it was long, it was it wasn't necessarily a lot of plot, but it was a lot of backstory that was necessary.
Right, and I
Like nothing seemed unnecessary in my opinion.
right, and I love it when writers use a device such as one character telling another character information that we need to know, but also does it not just, okay, sit down, son, let me teach you something.
Right,
It's
yeah.
actually within a conversation.
Yes,
It's
it
actually
was
within the context of the book.
yeah, even though I was complaining at the beginning about how long it was necessary with how long it was, and it didn't feel like just an information dump. It felt more like a true conversation
Correct.
with things happening where Frodo was we are Frodo in this story as the audience learning what we need to know, and Frodo is saying the things that I think we were thinking when we first read it, or at least for me when I first read it, was saying, okay, why don't I just throw it away right now? Why did this come to me? Why did it choose me? And then it answers it. It's like, okay, because the ring is sentient. The ring wants to be found. And it really shows Tolkien's writing. And even though I came on with it with a little bit of intimidation, I guess, with how long the chapter was, I liked it. It took me a bit to read it because of how much information it was,
Right,
but I definitely enjoyed it.
right. So the next chapter is called Three is Company.
Okay.
So what do you think is going to happen? What do you think is next in the narrative that we need to know, and what is next in the story
Okay.
of Frodo is going to happen?
So, Three's Company, from what I remember from the movie, I'm assuming the three is Sam, Merry, and Pippin. That's what I'm just going to go ahead and assume. That's going to be the hobbits that join Frodo along. And again, that comes from my movie knowledge. And again, knowing the movie, I'm going to assume that they're going to start out on their journey. They're going to run into Aragorn, or Aragorn's going to run into them. I'm going to guess that it's Gandalf that's going to have him intercept them to help them out because, like they mentioned in the book, he's best traveler and hunter in the world, and that they're gonna run into him from movie knowledge. I think this is when the ring wraiths are probably gonna show up. But knowledge that we need to know. Um, Honestly, I'm going to guess that it's going to be more plot heavy than information heavy, or at least I hope so. I hope to get a little bit more plot than information to start things moving. Though I am going to assume that knowing Tolkien and what I've read so far, that we're going to get a good background on Merry and Pippin and Sam. We might get a little bit of history of Aragorn. And they are going to start on their journey.
Okay. That sounds like it about wraps it all up.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Oh my gosh, I cannot thank you guys enough for actually listening to us. We have people that are subscribing. I just can't believe it, and I'm so happy that everyone is really enjoying this podcast. If you want to support us, we are now on Patreon. Just find us at Tolkien About It Podcast. Again, thank you so much. Podcasters have been Evelyn and Robert Lewis, edited by Evelyn Lewis, produced by Comic Canary, Evelyn Lewis, and Robert Lewis. Music provided by Ben Sound, link in the description. You can follow us at our website, tolkienaboutit.com. You can find us on Twitter at TolkienPod and Instagram at TolkienAboutIt. We are rather bad at social media, but we're getting better. And if you tweet at us, Instagram at us, Facebook us, we definitely will be interacting with you. And we hope to have a fun time with that. So we will see you all in 2 weeks. Thanks and have a great day.